Wells of Silence by TheBeckster. Chapter 11. 26 Weeks. A constant throbbing ache pounded behind Anakin's eyes. She was exhausted. The twins hadn't let her sleep well in several days, and when she did sleep long enough to reach dreams, they were disturbing. They were either more of those horrible nightmares that seemed to eat away at her mind, or they were incredibly weird, which ate away at her mind in different ways. Last night, she'd had a disturbingly vivid dream about giving birth to a litter of tukas through her ankle. She was glad the Chancellor would be traveling for a few days, and she was quite content with the fact that she couldn't accompany him. Given her last experience while traveling, she was absolutely not allowed to leave Coruscant until she was in a less delicate condition. It wasn't officially decreed by a doctor, but Padme, Palpatine, and Obi-Wan had all individually put their foot down. Anakin wasn't too disappointed. She really hadn't enjoyed being shot, even if her wounds had been healed in a matter of days. Master Chi was still lecturing her 3 weeks later. Her duties at the temple would keep her busy enough, but without her added duties to the Chancellor, she would get something of a break. And she really needed a break, even if it was just for one night. She just needed one night to be at home with Padme. Anakin hadn't spent a night at home in weeks. She almost felt this was more frustrating, to be so close to Padme and unable to spend the time together that she wanted. Anakin hadn't appreciated before how much easier it was to keep their marriage a secret when they were half a galaxy apart. She had a sneaking suspicion that spending time with Padme would be easier if it weren't for Obi-Wan. She couldn't blame him for worrying, but still, he had never been so attentive of her nightly habits before she got pregnant. But tonight, finally, Anakin would get her break. Obi-Wan was off planet, the Chancellor was leaving, and she had no further obligations to anyone except herself and her husband until the next morning. All she had to do was take her leave from the Chancellor, and she would be free. Anakin, my dear, can I speak with you for a moment? Palpatine's words floated through the door just as Anakin's finger hovered over the entry chime. That man had impeccable timing. She paused for a second before sliding the door open. Yes, Chancellor? Please, sit, Anakin. Palpatine stood behind his desk. He gestured to one of the chairs in front of him. His usual kind smile was gone, replaced with a somber frown. Anakin matched his expression as she sat down. This didn't bode well. She waited for Palpatine to settle and speak. He was reluctant to broach whatever subject he had in mind. Anakin, I was doing some research in some old Naboo records, and I came across something unexpected. Do you have any idea what it was? Anakin's blood ran cold. He knew. Padme had taken painstaking measures to bury the evidence of their marriage as deep as possible, where no one would find it. He had hidden it deep in old records that were accessible only to the Naboo royalty. How had Palpatine found it? His position as Supreme Chancellor must give him equivalent access to the records. I could only hazard a guess, she responded with a casual shrug, still holding on to the tiny shred of hope that Palpatine was talking about something completely different. It was a record of marriage between you and Senator Anidala. Anakin stayed silent. Knowing Palpatine was not done talking, she searched his eyes earnestly, looking for anger or malice. He was quite unreadable. Palpatine's tone turned towards appreciation as he spoke. I must say, Padme did a wonderful job of burying the evidence. I found it quite by accident. I wager a guess that if I hadn't been doing my research, it probably would have gone unseen for several decades, if not longer. Anakin's heart pounded. She was waiting for Palpatine to drop the axe, to let her know that as Supreme Chancellor, it was his duty to report such things, as they were technically illegal. By Republic law, marriages were public records, and public records could not be buried in archives available to only a handful of living people from Naboo. Palpatine's voice turned serious again. Now, I didn't ask you in here to lecture you or berate you, Anakin. You're not a child. I won't treat you as such. I know that you were fully aware of the consequences of your actions, should the truth arise. What decision you made and why matter very little to me. I just want to know what you would like me to do. Palpatine placed a small data stick on the desk. Anakin blinked, confused. What she wanted Palpatine to do? Was this some kind of joke? I don't understand. This here is the only existing record of your marriage. Palpatine tapped the data stick. I extracted it from the archives. There's no record it was ever there or that it was taken. What would you like me to do with this? But, Chancellor, your duties. Palpatine chuckled warmly. Anakin, my dear, I didn't make it as far as I have in life by throwing my friends in front of the rampaging bantha. You know that I take my duties to the Republic quite seriously, but in a matter such as this, well, to be perfectly honest, it's completely harmless. It can't hurt the Republic or anyone aside from you and Senator Anidala. You are my friend, Anakin, and Anidala is my former king. I have no qualms about doing this small favor for you. Palpatine sat back in his chair, smiling gently. Now, what would you like me to do with this? I can put it back where it was, or bury it deeper. I could destroy it. I could even lock it away in my personal vaults, where it will assuredly never be seen again. Anakin's heart pounded erratically. Blood rushed in her ears. Sitting just out of arm's reach was the one thing that could bring her whole world crashing down. And Palpatine had just offered to bury it for her, to overlook it completely and keep Anakin's secret as a favor? She knew that even among friends, favors rarely came free. One day Palpatine would try and collect on his favor, and Anakin couldn't trust that he wouldn't hold onto a bargaining chip like that. Palpatine was a politician, and they all collected ammunition to use on everyone they knew. That was how they played their games. But Palpatine hadn't been lying when he said this was the only record of her marriage. That meant there was only one thing to do with it. She took an even breath before she spoke. Can I have it? Of course. Palpatine slid the data stick across the desk. Anakin picked it up. She briefly considered crushing it in her robotic hand and removing all evidence right then and there. Instead, she slipped it into her robes. She sensed a curious flurry of thought and emotion from Palpatine. Anakin felt a shade of guilt creep up on her. Even though it had been absolutely necessary, she had lied to the Chancellor. He had been nothing but kind to her, becoming a mentor and confidant. Lying to him wasn't easy. Anakin, I dare say I understand why you kept this secret from me. The fewer people who know a secret, the easier it is to keep. and with your promising future as a Jedi and Amidala's successful career in the Senate, it's no wonder you wanted things to stay secret. But, and pardon me for asking, would I be incorrect in my assumption that Padme is the real father of your children? No. Anakin looked down, unable to meet Palpatine's eyes. She laid a hand across her stomach, her condition barely concealed beneath her loose robes. And none of the Jedi know, not even Master Kenobi? Anakin shook her head. No, if they already knew it, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Palpatine finished solemnly. How did he always seem to know what she was thinking? Anakin nodded. If they knew I would be expelled, the Jedi aren't known for breaking several thousand-year-old traditions. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but the Jedi have always considered you something of an exception to the rules, haven't they? After all, they accepted you in the Order when you were already 10. Anakin shook her head. Exceptions to that rule have been made before me. Particularly when it comes to finding Force-sensitive children outside of the Republic. But my current circumstances are something completely different. If they knew the truth, they most certainly would not bend the rules. Palpatine was quiet for a moment. Anakin didn't encourage more conversation. She just wanted to leave. My dear, what do the Jedi expect to happen with your children? He asked softly. They'll be born and raised in the temple. And if they are there, Padme won't be able to see them. He won't be part of their lives. No, he wouldn't. And would you? Isn't Jedi tradition to sever all ties to family? A flicker of anger rose up in Anakin's chest at the mere thought of the Jedi keeping her children away from her. I like to see them try and separate us. Palpatine looked at her critically, but said nothing about the dark edge to her voice. He continued speaking softly, and you're not ready to leave the Order yet, either. A heavy silence hung between the two for a moment. Anakin had almost forgotten that Palpatine knew of her frustrations with the Order. Not to the same extent as Padme knew them, but he had been a non-judgmental sounding board once or twice. She was grateful to have friends outside the Order, people she could talk openly and honestly with. She'd never be able to have a conversation like this with Obi-Wan. Anakin, what are you going to do? Palpatine's tone had the feeling of one who wanted to help but didn't know how. I don't know, Anakin admitted, with a defeated slump of her shoulders. Well, I suppose you still have some time, Palpatine offered in an attempt at reassurance. The problem was that Anakin had been trying to figure out this problem for months, ever since she felt that first flicker of life in the Force from within, and she was no closer to having a solution now than she was 6 months ago. She wanted the impossible, and yet, in the past, things that had always seemed impossible had become possible for her. Anakin knew her children and husband would come before the Jedi, but that didn't mean she was eager to leave the Order. She was just dragging out the inevitable, trying to keep things as they were for as long as possible, hoping a miraculous solution would present itself. She was running out of time. Palpatine stood up. Anakin followed him automatically. He rounded the desk with a somber expression and gently patted a hand on Anakin's shoulder. My dear, I can't even begin to imagine how difficult this all must be for you. If there is ever anything I can do to help, please do not hesitate to ask. Thank you, Chancellor, Anakin murmured with a sincere nod. Now, you look tired, my dear. Palpatine was smiling kindly again. Go home and rest. I'll see you in a few days. Anakin left quickly. She knew she should have gone back to the temple, made an appearance so someone would think that's where she was spending her evening off, and found some way to occupy her time until nightfall. But the data stick and Palpatine's words weighed heavily on her mind. She needed to talk to Padme about this. It couldn't wait. Anakin landed a speeder on their veranda. The apartment looked empty, but she could sense Padme in a back room. As she got closer, she could hear voices. Padme was talking to C-3PO. She startled them both as she stepped into the room. Anakin, what are you doing here? It's still light out, Padme asked anxiously. Anakin didn't respond as she crossed the room and pulled Padme into a tight embrace. Padme's presence, his warmth, his scent calmed her greatly. She tried vainly to pretend just for a moment that everything was all right. What's wrong? What happened? Are you all right? Nothing. I'm all right. We're all right. Padme tightened his hold on Anakin. Thank the goddess. Don't scare me like that. He chuckled weakly. Anakin smiled slightly. Sorry. She looked up over Padme's shoulder to see what he had been working on. They were partially constructed, intricately carved pieces of furniture. They were works of art as much as they were functional pieces. They were the cribs. Those are beautiful. I got them special from Naboo. The same carpenter made my crib as a child. Custom cribs? Padme, isn't that a bit too easy to track? I took painstaking steps to make sure nobody knows they're mine. It's all right, they're safe. Anakin breathed in relief. Sorry, I know you're being careful. I should trust you more. I'm just so on edge. It's all right, I understand. Padme planted a reassuring kiss on Anakin's lips. Are you hungry? I can get dinner started. Dinner sounds nice, Anakin murmured, not quite willing to let Padme go just yet. What would you like? Padme asked, with the same reluctance to step out of his wife's arms. Anakin took another moment to center herself on his heartbeat and breathing. She tried to let her worries fall away, at least for a little while. The data stick felt like a 20-pound weight in her pocket, but now that she was home, it didn't seem so urgent. She could bring up their marriage record after dinner. Anything you cook would be wonderful. Padme was the first to finally step away. I think I can come up with something. He turned back to his droid, who was busying himself with organizing the hard wire for the cribs. 3PO, please tell the security that I won't be accepting any visitors or guests tonight. Of course, Master Padme, Mistress Anakin, right away. The droid nodded stiffly and shuffled quickly out of the room. This was not an unusual order for him. Master Padme rarely entertained other guests when Mistress Anakin came to visit, though he wasn't entirely sure why. Human beings were such fickle creatures, he doubted if he would ever truly understand them. Anakin had thought she had kept up her semblance of normalcy quite well throughout dinner. As far as she could tell, Padme didn't suspect anything was wrong, or perhaps she had just been too focused on herself to notice anything. Padme waited until dinner was done and cleaned up before broaching the subject. They were standing together on the veranda, enjoying the enveloping darkness of the recently fallen night. Anakin, what's bothering you? Anakin stiffened and tried to settle back down. What makes you think something's bothering me? I'm your husband. I know when something is bothering you. He smiled gently at her. Now come on, what's wrong? Anakin's hand slipped into her robe and fiddled with the data stick hiding in there. She took a moment to speak. Padme waited patiently. Palpatine knows about us. Anakin could feel the cold dread sweep through Padme, but when he spoke, his voice was as steady as ever. How much does he know? Everything. He knows about our marriage, about our children. Padme breathed in sharply. How? He found our marriage record and he guessed the rest. He talked to me about it this afternoon. What did he say? Padme's voice shook a little. He's trying to be understanding. He said he would keep our secret, seeing as it's pretty much harmless to anyone else but us. He extracted our record and offered to take care of it for us, or put it back, or hide it away. Where is it? What did he do with it? I have it. Anakin pulled the stick out of her pocket. He gave it to me. This is the only copy. Padme took the data stick and turned it over a few times in his hands, inspecting it closely. Anakin could still feel a deep unease twisting around in her husband. She knew Padme didn't like Palpatine as much as she did, but he just didn't understand the Chancellor like she did. Can we trust Palpatine? He said he would keep our secret, Anakin explained again. Yes, but do you trust him, Annie? Anakin paused for a brief second before speaking with firm conviction. Yes, I do. Padme released a tense breath. Well, I trust you, and if you trust him, I guess we'll be alright. And he gave us our record to do with as we please. That's a good thing, too. A short silence fell between them as Padme kept turning the data stick over in his fingers. So, what should we do with it? Padme asked, taking Anakin's hand. He pressed the data stick back into her palm, but kept her hand trapped between his own. The smart choice would be to destroy it, make sure nobody else can find it. That would be the best way to go, Padme nodded in agreement. But you don't seem entirely sold on the idea. I don't know, I mean, I know it's dangerous, but without this record, would we really be married anymore? Padme understood her hesitance. Anakin had so few physical ties to the important people in her life. Jedi typically didn't keep mementos or trophies like regular citizens. She had managed to keep precious few sentimental items with the Order. He knew R2, his secret wedding gift to her, was her tie to him, and 3PO served the same role in reverse. This record was another. It was proof for someone to find in the future, when it no longer mattered that Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala had loved each other, that they had been married. But Anakin was practical and smart, more so than she was sentimental. She would never keep something this dangerous so close to her for too long. Hopefully one day, when they were all together as a family, he'd been able to give her solid proof of their marriage. Until then, they would just have to carry on. And there was still that book on Naboo. Annie, do you still love me even when we're half a galaxy apart and haven't seen each other in 3 months? Yes, Anakin responded immediately, unsure of the point Padme was trying to make. And when we're standing 10 feet from each other in a crowded room, am I still your husband, even if you can't say it out loud? Yes, of course. Well then, I guess we'll still be married, even if this record gets destroyed. Padme smiled reassuringly at his wife. I don't know about you, but I didn't vow to love you and be your husband for only as long as this record exists, did you? A smile pulled at Anakin's lips. No, I guess not. Then she looked back at the data stick and frowned again. But without the record, Anakin, I don't need a document to prove that I love you. I don't need it to tell me I'm married to you. This record, it's just data. It's not a sentimental memento. So if destroying it will make you feel better, then go ahead. Padme pressed a kiss to the back of Anakin's hand before letting it go. If anyone else had found it, it could have ruined us, Anakin muttered. She turned the innocent-looking stick over in her right hand, contemplating the power it contained. Palpatine had been right. It was pretty much harmless to anyone else, except it could destroy their lives. She hesitated, though, holding it between her fingers. It would be nice to have something official of their marriage, but Padme was right. They didn't need the document to prove that they loved each other, or to know they were married. Keeping it would only put them at risk. She dropped the stick into her palm and squeezed tightly. There was a light snap as the stick shattered. It felt unexpectedly cathartic, one less thing to worry about. Anakin dropped the pieces over the edge of the balcony, letting the wind carry them away. By the time they hit the ground, they'd be scattered and quickly crushed underfoot. And in just a few short seconds, and with little effort, Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala had never been officially married. Padme wrapped an arm around Anakin's waist, and she took a moment to lean into her husband before turning back inside. So Palpatine knows, but at least he's the only one. We may still be able to make this work. Anakin settled into the couch, trying to pull Padme to sit next to her. Padme hesitated. Staying on his feet, Anakin could feel guilt coursing through him. He's not the only one who knows. What do you mean? Anakin dropped Padme's hand and sat upright. Padme wrung his hands and looked aside. Last month, when you were shot, I thought I was going to lose you. All three of you. I was in a panic. Padme cut himself off and sighed. Bail Organa knows too. How did he find out? Anakin tried to keep her fear at bay and the anger out of her voice. She didn't know Organa that well. She couldn't trust him. How could he know their most dangerous secret? I told him. You told him? Anakin was on her feet again. I was in a panic. I was terrified I might lose you. He started asking questions about how and why I knew you were pregnant, and it just came out. Padme never broke eye contact with his wife. I'm sorry, Annie. Anakin could tell he was truly remorseful. She could tell he felt guilty about exposing them and keeping it from her. She could sense all of this, but it did little to quell her fear. Sorry? Sorry isn't going to make Organa forget what you told him. Sorry isn't going to protect us if he tells the wrong person. How could you do this to us, Padme? Anakin, he's one of my closest friends. I don't know him, Padme. I don't trust him. But I do. Padme caught Anakin's hands and held them tight, speaking earnestly, trying to console his wife. Bail Organa is an old friend. He's a close friend. I trust him with my life. I trust him to keep our secret. Anakin paused, remembering the whispers she had heard in Palpatine's office, rumors of a group of senators who were separatist sympathizers, who were against Palpatine's leadership. There were mutterings about a delegation planning to overthrow the Chancellor. Organa's name came up quite often. Did Padme know his closest friend was a separatist? He had shown weakness in the past. When it came to old friends being separatists, Anakin had let it slide. The war had torn apart many friends and brothers, but in this case, when their children were at risk, no separatist could ever know their secret. Annie? Padme's voice was soft, cautious. She blinked, shaking off her thoughts. Now was not the time to confront Padme about his separatist friends. She stepped away from Padme, pulling her hands out of his. I have to go. She crossed her arms tight across her chest and moved away, back to her speeder on the veranda. Annie, please don't go. Padme reached down and caught her arm. She shrugged off his touch and walked faster. I have monitor duty in the war room tonight. Sorry. He was stung by the lie. She could feel it, but he followed her anyway. I'm sorry, too, he said as she jumped into her cockpit. I love you, Annie. Anakin pretended she couldn't hear him over the noise of the engine starting up. Then, without looking back, she was flying away from Padme's apartment. End of chapter.